Your smaller bikes, the TW, the XT, the pegs are closer to the handlebars. The handlebars are closer to the seat. Yeah. Your riding position, you feel a little bit more like a circus bear on a little bicycle.
Smaller dual sports like Yamaha's TW and XT are for beginner riders and smaller riders, right? Maybe not. Smaller bikes are light and maneuverable and can be a ton of fun on a trail, even when things get technical. But what about for a larger rider? Should bigger guys look for a 400, 450, or even a 650 trail bike? After a comment from a viewer of my DRZ-WR comparison, I decided to ask my friend Andrew, an above-average rider who has been riding off-road for more than a few years, to share his experience with everything from Yamaha's TW200 to Honda's XR650L, and to comment on the WR450F and DR-Z400 I compared in an earlier video, with special attention to the needs of a bigger rider. Thanks to RichyRich 7676 for this idea.
Hey everybody, I'm Chris from Dual Sport PA. This is my friend Andrew, and we wanted to have a conversation today, primarily addressing a question that was sent by a viewer of one of my other videos. Andrew, I had a viewer that commented on the DRZ and WR video that he's a bigger guy. He's in his 40s, he's 250 pounder, over 6 foot. And he's been thinking about buying his first dual sport, but he's a little bit concerned about smaller dual sports, 250s, 300s. And so he's been kind of leaning toward the DRZ-400, primarily because he feels like maybe the other dual sports would be too small. And you're a guy, you're a little over 150 pounds.
Just a tad.
Just a tad over 150 pounds, 6 foot.
6'2", 310 pounds.
6'2", 310 pounds. And you've ridden a DRZ.
I have.
And would you, I'm going to go ahead and let you give a little bit of your own experience. Tell us what your experience was off-road riding as a kid, what you've had experience with since, and then a little bit of your experience with the DRZ specifically.
Sure, no problem. So I grew up riding a variety of wheeled motorized vehicles, starting off with the classic mini bike with the go-kart wheels and the 3.5 horsepower Tecumseh motor, torque converter, no brakes. I quickly earned the nickname Evel Knievel by the neighboring farmers because I just rode like a maniac with no brakes all the time. So
brakes are for sissies.
Yeah, and people that value their lives.
Right.
So I started out in a mini bike. My next bike after that was a 1976 Honda CT70, which was a massive upgrade from the go-kart mini bike. Yeah. It actually had a suspension and gears and brakes, so that was a big upgrade. Over time, I went through a few different bikes. The next one after that was a 1971 CL125. Which I ran pretty hard until I crashed it into the neighboring farmer's high tensile fence, which put a big hurting on it.
Put a big hurting on you too?
I was wearing long sleeves to hide the injuries on my arms from my parents for a few weeks.
Okay.
So after that, I bought a chassis or frame, rolling frame off of a neighbor kid. It was a 1972 SL125 frame, which I put the motor from the CL on and ran that for a number of years.
So that would have had a little bit more of an off-road oriented suspension.
It was a better suspension. Still technically a street bike, so it was a little rough, but it was, again, from where I started, it was amazing. Absolutely loved it.
And by this time, you're how old?
I probably would have been 13, 14 years old.
Okay, and so this is 13-year-old Andrew that's grabbing your dad's tools, and making these old bikes function and work, and then just riding the daylights out of them, right?
Just beating the living daylights out of them.
Okay, all right.
Breaking pegs off,
So into your teens, you started to upgrade capability a bit.
Yeah, so I went from the SL125 to a 1970, I think it was a 1976 or 77 CR250 Elsinore, which was a huge mistake. It was clapped out. I rode it for about a month, fouled plugs every minute, despite the fact that I rode it really hard. And my dad helped me rebuild it. We got a local small engine shop to bore it and put an oversized piston. And I got it back, and I knew I couldn't keep it because it was terrifying. So
power hits pretty abruptly.
Power was all or nothing. So from there, I started venturing into the dual sport world. So my brother helped me find a 1982 Honda XL250R.
Okay.
Which, despite the fact that it was an R, it was a dual sport. It had signals and everything. I think I was about 15 years old at that point, and that was the first bike that I purchased or had that actually suited my size, my riding, everything, and it was a great fit for me.
That was an XL250R.
Yeah, it was a precursor to the XRs.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was a great machine, despite the fact that it was also clapped out. The suspension was shot. It leaked oil everywhere. I tried really hard to make it stop. Being before the days of the internet, information was a little bit difficult to come by. My friends and relatives didn't really know a whole lot about them, so I was stuck with pretty much talking to mechanics at the dealership, and they didn't have any interest in helping a 15, 16-year-old
with a 20-year-old bike
fix it up. So it was a great bike.
Well, and it kind of set you up to be who you are too. I mean, you're the kind of guy, something goes wrong,
yeah,
you dig into it and figure out what the problem is and make it work, right?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, so doing maintenance on that and all the previous bikes, I learned a tremendous amount. One of the things that my father taught me as a very young child was the difference between somebody that fixes something and somebody that doesn't. Is the person that fixes stuff isn't afraid to make it worse. So if it's already broken, what's the worst that's going to happen? You're just going to break it more.
Okay.
So.
Okay, so in the interim years as an adult, you've had an XL650.
Yes, XR650.
XR650L, so dual sport. Have you owned any other motorcycles since then?
Yeah, so after the XL250, I got rid of that in my late teens and decided to get into mountain biking, which at that point I was 6'2", 250, 240 pounds. Bicycling wasn't a great choice at that time for me because the bicycles just weren't built to support my size. So I kind of lost touch with that. College came, and I didn't have finances to be in dirt bikes or motorcycles or bicycles or anything like that. So I quickly lost touch with it. After college, I returned home, and an old friend of mine who had a 2002 XR650L decided to give it to me. And it was a wonderful gift. I really enjoyed it. It was a wonderful bike. I rode it for a summer. Didn't like it. And the main reason was it was just very heavy, very top heavy. The center of gravity was very high. Despite the fact that it had plenty of capability power-wise, it wasn't great on the highway, wasn't great at least on the types of off-roading we do in central Pennsylvania, unless you just want to stay on fire roads. Mm-hmm. I just didn't really feel that it was a great machine for this area.
Okay, so fast forward a little bit, you get married, you start in with some responsibilities as a husband, as a homeowner, all of those kinds of things, and the bikes kind of go to the side for a while.
Yeah.
But you're riding something now.
I am. So before we get into that, let's rewind just a little bit. Okay. So actually when Chris got married, about that era, my aunt bought a TW200. It was in 1988. Yeah. And she had asked me to do some work on it. It needed tires and fork boots, and
I may actually have some pictures of you on that bike.
I'm sure you do. Yeah.
Okay.
So I would have been probably 17, I think, at the time. So I had the opportunity to ride the TW a good bit back then. And had a lot of fun on it. So that belonged to my aunt. So if we fast forward maybe 5 or 10 years, my brother made an arrangement with my aunt to buy the TW from him. So the '88 TW200. He ran it for a few years, lost interest, and it sat in his backyard and became a lawn ornament. So not usable, and I believe you dug it out of his yard, correct?
Yeah, I couldn't bear to see it continue to deteriorate, so I put it in my barn for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Expecting that if somebody had a little bit of time and effort to put into it, we could bring it back to its former glory.
Yeah. So that brings us to present. So my wife, she does not like motorcycles.
She doesn't have any problem with motorcycles. She doesn't like you being on motorcycles.
Yeah, she doesn't like me being on motorcycles. So my wife has the impression that motorcycles equal death, equal no husband, and she's not interested in that. So we've had kind of a lot of interesting conversations about dirt bikes, because I don't really like riding on the street. I do not like asphalt. I don't find it to be, I just don't enjoy it. I don't like being around cars. Absolutely love off-road. So,
and I would argue that, I mean, you get the exhilaration that you get from riding off-road at 20 and 30 miles an hour can't even be equaled on the street at 80 or 100 miles an hour, right?
Yeah.
So first of all, without cars and all kinds of things like aiming towards you, actively trying to kill you on the road, and without you sitting there at the mercy of a 100 horsepower sport bike on twisty roads with certain death at every turn, I would argue that the off-road experience is far more exhilarating for far less danger to your body.
I would agree 100%. Yeah. We could go down that rabbit hole for a while, but
we'll have another conversation.
Yeah.
About that.
So anyways, the present, the TW. I realized my wife, she would never agree to me to buy another dirt bike, another dual sport, any kind of motorcycle, but she never said that I couldn't have one, just couldn't buy one. So the TW, which belonged to my brother, which was in Chris's barn, I asked if I could work on it, if I could get it going again. So dug it out of the barn, brought it to my house, and we, over the course of like 3 months, we got it running. Chris was actually here the day that first time we got it to fire without the carburetor. That was interesting. And anyways, we brought it back to life. So I am, as of beginning of last summer, I was riding the TW200.
Okay, so I actually have some footage of you riding a TW that I'll probably put in here. And I've got to say, you fly on that TW. Like, you make that thing flow through trails unlike anybody could think would be possible.
Yeah.
And even like on the road, you get the thing going over 60 miles an hour. Like it really blew me away.
Yeah. Yeah, so my history with riding off-road, as I said, I started out on a bike without suspension or brakes. I'm not a real connoisseur of suspensions. I don't require to have the absolute best finely tuned suspension for me or for anybody else. So I'm used to riding something without a lot of suspension. So for me, where it comes in is, does it have the power to move? And the TW200, it's a small bike, but it's a torque monster. Okay. It'll move. I'm 310 pounds. It'll move me down any trail, up any hill that I can get traction on. So
is it geared stock?
Yeah.
And did you do anything to the motor in terms of performance mods when you rebuilt it?
No, nothing.
Okay, so essentially stock carburetor. Actually, was it a replacement carburetor?
No, it's a rebuilt carburetor.
Okay, so rebuilt OEM type carburetor. Same gearing, and it can take you up any hill.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've not encountered anything. If anybody are familiar with Pennsylvania trails, the Penoke Trail in Allegheny National Forest has a very reputable hill climb towards the end of it. No trouble, no problems.
So you also have a great deal of experience on another bike of similar build size, the XT225.
I do.
Which a friend has. I've heard some YouTubers call that a cheat code for off-road, for trail riding. So, like these small bikes, they're low enough you can put your feet down if you get into anything really hairy, right?
Yeah.
They're geared low enough that they pretty much tractor up over anything. You're riding a TW200, which is not seen as a particularly powerful bike, But you would say that the limitation in that bike is definitely not in its ability to haul around a larger guy.
Absolutely.
Okay.
The limitation is in the XT as well, suspension, brakes, how heavy duty the wheel sets are, things like that.
Okay. So let's talk about then how the DRZ compares. And you have actually ridden the WR.
I have.
That I rode and did a comparison with. I'd be interested in your take on, like, does a bigger guy need to have a bigger bike, and why?
That's a very good question. A lot of it comes down, actually, what I said right before you asked that question is suspension, in my opinion. So your smaller bikes, the TW, the XT, the pegs are closer to the handlebars are closer to the seat.
Yep.
Your riding position, you feel a little bit more like a circus bear on a little bicycle. The WR, the DRZ, bigger, everything's spread out a little bit further, so you're not so cramped up on the bike.
Yep.
But I would say the biggest thing is the suspension. The suspensions on the smaller displacement bikes, at least the ones I have experience with, just aren't built for a bigger guy.
They've got a smaller fork, not nearly as beefy, not nearly as heavy,
Yeah.
not as much suspension travel.
Right.
And I guess as long as you're not necessarily expecting it to soak up all that stuff,
Yeah.
you just let it hit the stops and keep going, right?
Yeah, if you're not trying to ride too hard, if you're not taking on motocross tracks, if you're not trying to ride over really rocky areas too fast, like, it's great, especially for a beginner. The XT and the TW are just phenomenal beginner bikes. They're low center of gravity. They're easy. The clutches are easy to operate. They're geared very low. Just extremely, the cheat code thing. That's a great description, actually, of both of them.
Yeah. So then, in terms of getting over logs and rocks and those kinds of things, you can still do it. Just don't expect to do it at speed without feeling it.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So talk to the guy who's your size or approaching your size, and he's looking at the DRZ. He's maybe looking at some of the other machines like the Honda 300 Rally, a KLX 300. Talk to that guy. What do you think sets these bikes apart? And would you say that there's any advantage in one over another?
I think it's going to come down to the type of riding that you're wanting to do. If you're wanting to ride it on the highway a lot, the smaller displacement bikes will definitely do it. As I said, the TW, I can get it up to 60 miles an hour without a lot of trouble. The XT 225, it cruises fine on 55 mile an hour highways. If you want to do interstates, you're in for a uncomfortable ride.
But for more reasons than just that it's buzzy, right? Like, so there's no protection from the wind. You're pretty much just out there exposed.
Yeah.
Every truck that goes by, you've got very low mass, so you're blown around, right? So, so it's like anybody who says, well, this bike doesn't have a sixth gear, or this bike is buzzy at highway speeds. I think they're missing the point of these bikes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So if you're looking more off road for dirt roads, single track, things like that, it really comes down to what fits you. Especially if you're a novice rider. The DRZ is a handful. It's not a small bike. The seat's a lot higher. Center of gravity's higher. It has excellent torque, excellent power. So if you're not used to dealing with that in an off road scenario, it's gonna be a little bit more intimidating to get used to. Where if you're just starting off, a smaller displacement bike, I would wager up to 350, maybe more pounds. You're gonna be able to go on pretty much any trail with a 200cc 4-stroke, and maybe not be racing, but you're gonna be able to do it very comfortably and competently.
So let's talk about our friend who owns the WR, who also owns two XTs.
He does.
And he's over 250 pounds, right?
Yep.
And right in the video that we probably is linked up here somewhere, he comments that there were certain parts of that trail that he would have rather been on his XT.
Yeah.
Clearly they're pulling him around just fine too.
Yeah, no problems at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
So any other words of advice for somebody who's concerned about too small a bike?
Yeah, I would say displacement power, like, you're not really going to find too small unless you buy like a Trail 125 or something like that. It really comes down to what's comfortable for you as far as seat height, you know, being stretched out enough, not being too cramped. And then from there, it's suspension, you know, what you're willing to deal with. I think that the displacement and power, especially for a beginner, that should probably be your second criteria on selecting a bike. First is what fits you well and what you find to be manageable.
Yeah, and I think it goes without saying too, but I'll say it anyway. If you get a bike that you kind of outgrow in the first year or two, man, at the prices that these things are going for used, you're not, as long as you don't destroy it in that amount of time, you're really not losing anything.
No.
Get a bike, go ahead and ride it, have fun with it for a couple of years, and you should be able to trade or sell and still get something out of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, hey, I really appreciate you taking some time. This was fun.
Yeah.
I think you and I are probably going to spend some time on a trail together here over the next couple of months.
Yeah, I got to get the TW out of the shed and make sure it still runs.
Do you have any thoughts about buying a new bike anytime?
I do. Yeah, I do. I would like to buy a bike within the next, I'm going to say 18 months.
Okay.
I'm thinking a year from now, probably I'll be shopping. Chris, you put me onto the DRZ. I've ridden it. I think it's a phenomenal bike. You know, I don't have a real vast, you know, broad experience on different dual sports, but from what I've experienced, I think that it's an excellent choice. And for me, I think it would be a good fit. The WR, as Chaz said, it's a load of fun, but it's a little terrifying.
I don't trust myself enough with that level of power.
Yeah.
And that, you know, that's why that and the extra $5,000 is why I'm not running an FE350, a 500 EXCF, you know, something like that.
Yeah.
Just because, you know, I've got a healthy respect for what that kind of power can do to my brain. There's something that happens when I get on the seat of something like that my brain disconnects from reality, and you just pulling that throttle back is just so much fun. Yeah, it is. Too much.
It's one of the things I enjoy about a smaller displacement bike is I can ring it out, and it's very exhilarating. I get on the WR and I start doing stuff that's very questionable. Not that I don't do things that's questionable on the smaller bikes, but very questionable.
Would you agree then that it's more fun to ride a slow bike fast than it is to ride a fast bike slow?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that segues into the whole asphalt riding on the street thing. So, but that's for another video.
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, I've really enjoyed just taking some time with Andrew here. He will be back, I guarantee it. Thanks for giving us a little bit of your time. I hope it was enjoyable for you, and I look forward to seeing you on the trail.